So I'm thrilled to be here. As Lucy introduced, my name is Erica Goldman. I'm the Director of Policy Engagement for Compass. And just as Lucy shared in the introduction, we are a small boundary organization, and we focus on building capacity for scientists to engage through communication skills and training. And in my role as policy director, I spend a lot of time working directly with scientists and helping to support them to directly connect to policymakers at relevant and transformative times. As a bit of background, one of Compass's original founders was Jane Lubchenco, a marine ecologist at Oregon State University. This image is from 1998 when she was president of AAAS. And in that role, she authored an editorial that was a bit of a call to arms to the scientific community, basically outlining this idea about a new social contract for science and calling upon scientists not only to do outstanding research, publish that research, but make sure that that research is communicated in a way that is credible and salient and reaches the people who need to use that information. So she asserted this principle that science should be at the table in a way that's understandable, relevant, credible, and salient. But there's a big span between publishing that work and actually getting it to the tables at which decisions are made. And I like to think about this construct of scientists operating within a scientific discipline and then in the broader societal frame, and thinking about the ways to make sure that the science that scientists are doing are reaching a broader section of society requires really understanding and being able to navigate between the cultures of academic science and the culture of policy and policymakers. And a lot of the way in which we work with scientists and we teach scientists to think about bridging the cultures starts at the point of trying to understand the divides between them. So when we think about the these are flashing. So we think about the cultures of science and the cultures of policy. The culture of, sorry, you guys are not seeing these slides. So we think about the culture of science, thinking a lot about cumulative evidence, where policymakers are really thinking immediately about what that evidence has to do with the decisions right in front of us. Scientists are working more in depth. Policymakers want to know the bottom line, and they want to know it right up front. Scientists are very comfortable working in a realm of uncertainty. Communicating that uncertainty to policymakers for a course of action is very different. Thinking about credentials in the scientific community is a currency of legitimacy and credibility. That does matter in the policy world, but really the perspectives that science and scientists can bring matter very much and right up front. And then also thinking about the difference between thinking about decisions on a very rational, methodical basis versus more emotional, in the moment kind of cultures within the policy realm. And then there's a lot that we can think about in terms of the pace and tempo of scientific research versus the pace at which that scientific research and the content can reach those that are making decisions. When it comes down to a few key factors about the culture of policymaking, I really think about three key features that are at the very top. One is that relationships and the currency of relationships is absolutely paramount. So the trust between individuals is a source of credibility within the policy realm that is as much as the credentials in a scientific journal. So the messenger matters very, very much, and the relationships that you can build matter tremendously. Second is that policymakers are really operating within this realm of discrete decision points. So if you think about the timing it takes to do scientific research, publish that research, get it into the journals, and publish it, trying to figure out the time frame of that research coming out in a scientific paper versus where a policymaker is in with a discrete decision point requires a lot of listening and thinking about the timing on both sides of the equation. How is it that what's coming out in the moment might be used and useful to what policymakers are considering right here, right now? And here's where Josh and other magazines like Scientific American do play a very big role in helping to be a conduit between covering the science that's coming out in the literature and making sure that it's timed to matter in the realm of policymaking. And then framing really, really matters. This is a map that was in Grist magazine at the beginning of the 2016 election cycle, and I really like it because I think it speaks to how to talk about climate change in different parts of the United States. So whereas you may not ever, in our current political context, it may be very hard to talk about anthropogenic carbon dioxide and the processes there. It is not that hard to talk about chronic wasting disease in moose in Maine and have that really connect and resonate with people. Similarly, thinking about water security out west and drought, heat waves, tree loss. So these are ways to connect the science to what's immediately at hand. And from a communication standpoint, this takes a lot of work and a lot of understanding of the context in which policymakers are working. I really like this quote by Michael Rodemeyer. Michael Rodemeyer was a long-term legislative counsel on the House Science Committee for about 15 years, and he also worked in the executive office of the president under President Clinton. Policymakers are not interested in the science per se, but in the public goods that science can deliver. So it's the content that the scientific enterprise are producing feeds into good policy, but they're not necessarily interested in the science for the science's sake. So how do you take the scientific evidence and turn it into that public good, which can be so useful? So in my mind, a lot of these rules for engaging with policymakers haven't changed, but the context in which we're watching unfold in front of us has changed dramatically. We're seeing an unprecedented time with science under attack and a galvanizing of the scientific constituency that we've never seen before. But despite the current immediate context, policymakers still need the public goods that science can provide. So I don't think any of these rules of engagement, thinking about framing and relationships and effective communication, have changed that much. I heard John Holdren speak on Friday night at AAAS, just ahead of the March for Science on Saturday, and he gave 3 messages of advice to the science community. First was keep doing your science. Just keep doing it well. Keep doing it in the government if you can, but keep doing your science and getting it out there. Keep talking about your results and talking about it in a way that's credible and understandable, but not just your results. Try to share more about the process of science and why we know what we know and how we know what we know. And this speaks to the framing of this panel around information and misinformation. How does the process of science generate credibility? And then his third point, which I think he's made in other public speeches before, but really spoke to me, is he said scientists should be thinking about tithing, and he used the word tithe, which I think is strong, tithing 10% of their time to policymaker education. And I thought that was a pretty strong statement. I think policymaker education is going to mean different things to different people, but tithe 10% of your time to policymaker education. So 10%, maybe it seems about right. This is going to take a lot of effort in both training and boundary spanning, like developing new relationships with policymakers. And it's more than just advocating for science and science funding. It's figuring out how to share your science as a public good. And I think if you think about the science to decision cycle as a loop, the broken link or the challenging link is how do we build stronger connections between research and decision? And I guess I just want to end on a few thoughts about roles for scientific publishing and science societies. Training opportunities for members. I know some societies have been really taking a lead on developing curriculums for their membership and experimenting with online delivery of content in a broad-scale way. I know the American Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology has been working on this for the past couple years. So like large-scale training opportunities for members. And I would include in there, thinking about Mark's talk in the plenary, a little bit, or Mike's talk in the plenary, thinking about opportunities to support individual authors when they have potentially transformative papers coming out, helping them make connections beyond developing a one-pager, helping make relevant introductions. And this may not be something that societies can do on a author-by-author case, but thinking about, especially around if you're publishing whole special issues and packages communicating a body of research, thinking about who really needs to hear that information and how are you going to get it right into their hands, making sure that it reaches the target audience. Another idea is thinking about innovative conference design and journal features. So think about inviting policymakers to your conferences, and not just in plenary roles. So think about ways to potentially integrate them as moderators and discussants into sessions, because they're often very, very willing to engage, and their perspectives are really, hearing it straight from a policymaker is eye-opening and transformative. And so thinking about how to integrate the culture that they provide more directly into conferences and journal features like Q&As and interviews with policymakers in the pages of your journal, so that that culture of policymaking and that culture of science come into contact with more direct proximity. And then finally, I keep coming back to relationships, both between individual scientists and individual policymakers, and then also thinking about, I think there's this perception that, congressional staff don't read journal articles. And I think while that's true to some extent, I think there are committee staff that do read journal articles and would be very, very appreciative of getting an email saying the latest research is coming out on this. Are you interested? And then I also think, if you're not familiar with the Congressional Research Service, they are, I think, a treasure for helping to be a conduit between the academic science community and Congress. So the Congressional Research Service acts as Congress's on-demand librarian, basically calling up the latest information on a particular area. You, as societies and publishers, can provide direct input to staff in the Congressional Research Service, and they will have the latest. And so whether or not a policymaker is going to read the latest journal article, the CRS, the Congressional Research Service, will be very grateful to have some of it. So I'm just going to end there. Sorry about the technical difficulties. And thank you. Sorry if that went long.